I grew up hearing stories about men and women who seemed to have the golden touch, those who built empires without ever tiring, who possessed an almost supernatural intuition about money and opportunities. From an early age, I wondered, what did these people know that the rest of us didn't? Why do most struggle to earn a decent living, while others simply prosper, as if there were some secret formula, passed down from generation to generation, hidden from the common world? My search began in ancient books, in forgotten scrolls, in the records of civilizations that mastered wealth long before we understood modern concepts of finance: Egyptians, Babylonians, Romans. They all had a common thread, a set of silent, almost sacred principles that guaranteed not only prosperity, but stability, abundance, and a vision beyond the immediate. It was as if they had access to a language of wealth that we have lost over time. What's most fascinating is that these principles weren't just about accumulating gold or property. They were about energy, perception, calculated action, and strategic patience. Things you don't learn in schools or in modern get-rich-quick courses. And yet, they were there, in the details left by history, in the discrete rituals, in the almost mystical practices that seemed simple, but carried a power capable of shaping destinies, and so I set out to find out. Each stone I lifted revealed layers of knowledge I never imagined existed. Each ancient manuscript I studied showed repeating patterns, signs pointing to fundamental principles, three in particular that, if understood and applied, could transform the way we view and interact with wealth. These are the secrets they no longer teach, hidden beneath the dust of time, waiting to be rediscovered by those brave enough to seek. What you'll see next isn't just theory. It's a deep dive into ancient wisdom, into what really built empires and preserved wealth from generation to generation. Brace yourself, because what I'm about to reveal challenges everything you've learned about money and power. From the moment I decided to follow these ancient trails, I realized that wealth wasn't just about accumulating assets or money in the bank. The first thing that stood out was perception, a way of seeing beyond what meets the eye. The greats of history weren't just lucky. They had a way of observing the world that seemed almost magical. Every movement, every opportunity hidden in everyday life, every change in the economy or social environment was recorded with absolute attention. It was as if they had an internal antenna, capable of capturing patterns that escaped common sense. I began to train my own perception, trying to notice the subtle signs that indicated where the flow of prosperity was hidden. And that's when I realized perceiving isn't just seeing, it's interpreting. It's connecting invisible dots and understanding what they mean about the future. But mere perception wasn't enough. Knowledge only became power when combined with strategic action. I studied how these ancients planned their steps, how each decision was carefully calculated, almost like a chess game spanning decades. It wasn't about blindly taking risks, but about positioning oneself correctly, knowing when to advance and when to retreat. I learned that wealth requires patience, but not passivity. It's a dance between waiting for the right moment and acting with surgical precision. When I began implementing small actions aligned with my perception, the results didn't appear immediately, but the feeling of being on the right path was undeniable. Each small success validated that I was absorbing something that had been forgotten over time. At the same time, I realized that personal energy played a fundamental role. The ancients understood that their own vibration influenced the reality around them. This wasn't empty mysticism, but a practical science of presence, intention, and influence. People who exuded confidence, calm, and clarity of purpose attracted opportunities, allies, and resources like a magnet. When I began to consciously apply this, I noticed that situations that previously seemed random or unfair began to align in surprising ways. It was as if fortune itself responded to the quality of my energy, the consistency of my focus, and the integrity of my intentions. And so, each layer of understanding connected to the previous. Perception guided action, energy aligned action amplified results, and strategic patience kept everything moving at a pace that even time dared not hasten. I realized that these were not just isolated principles. They were threads of an ancient tapestry, woven to create not only wealth but resilience, vision, and freedom. I began to see that those who truly prospered understood this balance, and it is precisely this that few realize when they pursue only money, without understanding the bigger picture. As I progressed on this journey, it became clear that it's not just about spotting opportunities or acting strategically. There's a deeper, almost invisible element that has always separated those who truly accumulated wealth from those who merely dreamed of it: an understanding of time and the natural rhythm of things. The ancients didn't force events, they didn't seek illusory shortcuts. They understood that each phase of life, each economic cycle, each social change brings with it specific opportunities, and that acting out of time could mean irreparable losses. I began to observe my own life through this lens, realizing that many decisions we made in haste or anxiety weren't choices, but impulses, and that it was precisely in this detail that most stumbled. Learning to respect time is, in fact, a form of discipline. And discipline, I realized, is a silent principle that spans centuries. Great ancient leaders and merchants had routines, habits, and internal codes that kept their minds clear, their focus sharp, and their emotions balanced. They knew that external chaos could only be faced with internal order. By implementing small daily routines of reflection and planning, I began to feel the difference. Decisions became more conscious, opportunities more evident, and risks more calculated. I realized that true wealth never arises from impulses, but from the silent consistency of intelligent actions. At the same time, I learned about influence and alliances. No empire is built alone. The ancients mastered the art of creating powerful connections, of cultivating relationships that generated mutual opportunities, but in subtle, almost invisible ways. Wealth was an ecosystem, and each person around me could be a bridge to something greater. I began to pay attention to who surrounded me, who shared values, who could teach me something I hadn't yet learned. I discovered that prosperity wasn't just about what I did, but also about who I allowed into my circle and how I nurtured those connections. This combination of insight, strategic action, personal energy, respect for time, and alliance building formed a cohesive framework. Each element amplified the other, creating an invisible but immensely powerful multiplier effect. And it was at this point that I began to feel I was truly tapping into the secrets the ancients held. They weren't magic formulas or innate luck, but intertwined principles that, when applied together, shaped destinies and preserved wealth for generations. As time passed, it became clear that all these principles were complemented by something even more subtle: long-term vision. Ancients weren't driven by immediate rewards. Each decision was thought out decades in advance, as if playing a game that spanned generations. When I began applying this perspective, I realized that we often sabotage ourselves by seeking quick results, by giving in to the temptation of immediate gains that, in fact, distance us from true prosperity. Learning to think long-term isn't easy. It requires patience, self-confidence, and, above all, the ability to ignore the external noise, the superficial advice, the passing fads, the pressure to appear to be quick successes. This vision of the future connected directly to resilience. The ancients understood that every cycle of wealth was accompanied by challenges and crises, and that true prosperity depended on how we responded to adversity. I began to notice that, instead of fearing obstacles, I could learn from them, anticipate their movements, and use them as momentum. The resilience wasn't just physical or financial, but mental and emotional. Each setback became a codified lesson, an opportunity to reinforce habits, adjust strategies, and stay firmly in the right direction. Wealth, I realized, is as much a matter of smart survival as it is of seized opportunity. As I delved deeper into this journey, I learned the value of selective knowledge. The ancients guarded their secrets, yes, but not out of selfishness. They understood that information is power, and that the correct use of knowledge requires discernment. I learned to filter what I consumed, to focus only on what truly added value to my vision, avoiding distractions that consumed energy without generating progress. Each fragment of ancient knowledge I studied, each pattern I identified, strengthened the invisible foundation of my wealth. It was as if I were reconstructing an ancient map, with pieces that fit together silently, but with absolute precision. And then I realized something fundamental: all these principles, perception, strategic action, personal energy, respect for time, alliances, long-term vision, resilience, and selective knowledge are not separate skills. They are parts of the same flow, a wisdom that, when understood together, transforms not only wealth but the very way we see life. Each step brought me closer to a deeper understanding. True wealth is not a destination, but a journey, a daily practice, a dance between knowing, feeling, and acting. As I began applying these principles to my daily life, I realized that the difference wasn't just in the numbers or possessions, but in how each decision became conscious and aligned with a greater purpose. Every financial choice, every negotiation, every investment of time or energy began to be evaluated through the lens of ancient wisdom. It was no longer improvisation, it was calculation, intuition, and perception working together. Small details, which previously went unnoticed, began to make all the difference. A casual conversation could turn into an opportunity. A seemingly insignificant encounter could reveal unexpected paths, and even moments of apparent stagnation could become strategic learning. The habit of observing and interpreting signals allowed me to spot opportunities that others considered random or irrelevant. I began to see economic, behavioral, and social patterns that repeated themselves over time. It was like decoding a forgotten language where each event carried subtle information about where to shift resources, attention, and efforts. At the same time, practicing strategic patience taught me not to get carried away by immediacy. Each action was considered, each risk carefully assessed. I learned that impulse leads to distraction, but conscious action, combined with intuition, creates solid and sustainable paths. Another transformative effect was on the way I related to people. Long-standing alliances, carefully cultivated, proved crucial. These weren't just superficial contacts, but meaningful connections based on trust, reciprocity, and shared vision. I discovered that when we align our intentions with the energy of the right people, we multiply our results in ways that isolated efforts could never achieve. Wealth, then, ceased to be a solitary goal and became an ecosystem of interconnected actions, relationships, and opportunities. And, as I observed my own energy, I realized something deeper was happening. Consistency of habits, clarity of purpose, and emotional balance attracted opportunities almost naturally. It was as if the universe itself responded to internal coherence, reflecting my discipline and focus on tangible results. The selective knowledge I had cultivated now acted as a filter, keeping my attention on what truly mattered, eliminating distractions, and reinforcing the right direction. In the end, I realized that true wealth isn't just about money or possessions. It's about the ability to see beyond, act with precision, maintain aligned energy, respect the cycles of time, and create meaningful connections. Each principle intertwined with the other, forming an invisible yet powerful system capable of transforming any trajectory. And the more I applied it, the more palpable the effects became, not only in what I owned, but in the way I interacted with the world, always guided by an ancient wisdom that many have forgotten, but which still exists, waiting to be discovered. As I applied these principles, I realized that true wealth isn't limited to the present. The ancients understood that true prosperity involves creating something that lasts, that transcends generations, that becomes a legacy. It wasn't just about accumulating material goods, but about building structures, whether financial, social, or spiritual, that would continue to generate value even when they were no longer present. I began to view my own actions with this perspective. Every decision should impact not only my present moment, but the future I could influence. In this process, a long-term vision proved even more crucial. The ancients planned decades ahead, sometimes generating wealth that would only flourish for their descendants. They understood that time is a powerful ally, capable of multiplying resources, opportunities, and learning when cultivated patiently. I began to organize my priorities and investments with this extended horizon in mind, understanding that small, consistent actions today could yield enormous results tomorrow. The sense of security and control this provides is something that immediate money could never offer. But expanding wealth also required courage and creativity. It wasn't about following ready-made formulas, but about interpreting ancient wisdom in ways adapted to the modern world. By observing patterns, spotting opportunities, and cultivating strategic alliances, I began to identify paths that previously seemed impossible. I discovered that great empires and ancient fortunes were not the result of luck, but of calculated and bold decisions aligned with universal principles. And that applying these lessons today requires the same courage, combined with the ability to learn from mistakes and adjust course. Another essential element was preserving personal energy. Consistency of habits, discipline, and clarity of purpose became even more important. The ancients understood that those who disperse energy or allow themselves to be carried away by distractions rarely succeed in sustaining their prosperity. By focusing on what truly mattered, my efforts began to multiply. Every action, every relationship, every investment began to reverberate in an amplified way, as if in tune with greater forces that I didn't yet fully understand, but felt deeply. And then came the deeper understanding. True wealth is a living system, a network of mutually sustaining principles. Every conscious decision, every perceived opportunity, every strategic action, and every cultivated relationship form a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. This is what separates those who accumulate fleeting fortunes from those who build lasting legacies. And by applying these principles in an integrated way, I felt I was finally touching the essence of what the ancients called prosperity, a state that unites knowledge, action, and vision, capable of shaping not only the present but the future in extraordinary ways. As I progressed on this journey, I began to realize that the ancients didn't seek wealth for its own sake. For them, true prosperity was intimately linked to life's purpose. Money wasn't an end in itself, but a means to achieve something greater, protecting families, educating generations, positively influencing communities, and leaving a legacy that transcended time. I began to question my own motivations. Every financial decision needed to reflect something deeper than mere comfort or status. The more I aligned my actions with this purpose, the more wealth flowed naturally and almost inevitably. This understanding brought a clarity that transformed my relationship with challenges. Obstacles ceased to be mere impediments and became opportunities to align my actions with my mission. The ancients knew that crises and setbacks were not punishments, but tests of vision and resilience. Each difficulty was a mirror, reflecting where there was still imbalance or weakness to be addressed. By adopting this mindset, I realized that the fear of loss or failure became irrelevant. True strength lay in remaining true to one's purpose, regardless of external circumstances. At the same time, I began to appreciate the importance of continuous learning. Ancient wisdom wasn't static, it required adaptation and interpretation. Great empire builders studied, observed, and reflected constantly, learning from successes and failures, adjusting courses, and reinventing strategies. I began integrating this practice into my daily life, cultivating intellectual and emotional discipline, keeping my mind open and alert to patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. This subtle but powerful habit began to create an invisible advantage. I was connected to a stream of opportunities that only the prepared can see. And then came an even more profound realization: wealth, when aligned with purpose and wisdom, transforms not only the lives of those who possess it, but also those around them. Every strategic action, every relationship cultivated, every decision made with intention reverberated, creating invisible ripple effects. I began to understand that prosperity isn't just individual. It's an ecosystem that expands when we act with awareness, ethics, and vision. The ancients knew this, and that's precisely why their fortunes endured, not just financially, but as living legacies of influence and learning. At the end of this process, it became clear that true wealth is not an isolated concept. It is the synthesis of keen perception, strategic action, aligned energy, patience, alliances, long-term vision, resilience, selective knowledge, and deep purpose. Each principle reinforces the other, forming a system that guides not only the accumulation of resources, but also the creation of lasting meaning, impact, and legacy. And the more I applied these lessons, the more I felt I was connecting past, present, and future into a single line of conscious prosperity. Over time, it became clear that wealth is not just about knowing how to act, but about knowing when not to act. The ancients understood that every decision has weight and consequences, and that recklessness is one of the greatest enemies of prosperity. I realized that many opportunities that seemed tempting were actually traps in disguise, and that discernment, the ability to filter, analyze, and choose accurately, was an essential skill rarely taught openly. As I developed this awareness, I began to notice subtle signs that indicated hidden risks, people's attitudes, market patterns, social movements, and even details that most people overlooked. It wasn't just a matter of cold logic, it was also refined intuition, a skill cultivated over time, based on observation, study, and experience. The more I applied this practice, the more my instincts aligned with concrete facts and patterns, and my decisions became almost automatic, yet grounded in deep knowledge. I discovered that discernment isn't innate, it's trainable. Each past mistake became a silent manual, shaping my future choices. And with each clear decision, the feeling of control and security grew, reinforcing that this was one of the pillars that supported ancient empires of wealth. At the same time, I realized that discernment is directly connected to strategic patience. Those who thrived weren't driven by immediacy or a rush for results. They waited, observed, and acted at the exact moment when the opportunity perfectly aligned with their long-term vision. I began to integrate this approach into my daily life, learning to bide my time, measure risks, and maximize every move. Haste, I realized, is the enemy of abundance. Time is a powerful ally when you know how to wait. Furthermore, making smart decisions requires emotional discipline. It's easy to get carried away by impulses, fears, or vanity, but the ancients understood that lasting wealth depends on inner stability. By cultivating self-control and balance, I found my energy was preserved for what truly mattered, and my actions became more effective. Every choice reflected not only intelligence, but also integrity, vision, and conscience. And it was at this point that I realized something fundamental: discernment is not an isolated principle. It amplifies all others: perception, strategic action, long-term vision, resilience, and purpose. Without this skill, any knowledge or opportunity can be wasted. But when applied accurately, it creates an invisible multiplier effect, capable of transforming small advances into lasting achievements and conscious decisions into legacies that span generations. As my decisions became more conscious and my discernment sharpened, I realized that true wealth transcends the mere accumulation of goods. It manifests fully when combined with influence, knowledge, and legacy. The ancients didn't just accumulate resources. They created invisible networks of power, shaping environments, people, and futures almost silently. I began to understand that my every action didn't exist in isolation, but reverberated, impacting everything around it, and that the ability to create this synergy was essential for prosperity to last. This expansion of influence requires more than talent or luck. It requires alignment between intentions and actions. The ancients planned not only what they would do, but how their actions would affect others. Every relationship cultivated, every strategic choice, and every decision made with integrity contributed to an invisible web that sustained their position and expanded their power almost organically. Observing this, I realized that wealth without influence tends to be fragile and ephemeral, while influence sustained by solid principles multiplies, opening doors and generating previously unimaginable opportunities. As I applied these concepts to my daily life, I noticed something striking. Knowledge and influence are forces that feed off each other. The more I learned, the more my vision expanded, allowing me to act with precision and create meaningful connections. The more these connections strengthened, the more my knowledge was tested and refined. It was a virtuous cycle, silent but immensely powerful, that reflected exactly what the ancients did, transforming resources, skills, and relationships into a structured web of continuous prosperity. Another fascinating aspect is how the synergy between wealth, knowledge, and legacy creates invisible multiplier effects. A well-planned strategic action reverberates on multiple levels, achieving not only immediate results, but also opening doors for the future, protecting investments, and building a solid reputation. I began to realize that each step needed to be considered holistically, considering not only the present, but also the future repercussions on my life, my community, and even people I would never meet directly. And it was at this point that the deepest dimension of ancient wisdom revealed itself. Prosperity is not just about earning, but about creating something that transcends the individual. It's about generating value, teaching, inspiring, and paving the way for others to prosper as well. As I began to align my actions with this vision, I realized that every principle I had learned, perception, strategic action, personal energy, patience, alliances, long-term vision, resilience, selective knowledge, and discernment found its ultimate expression. Wealth ceased to be an isolated goal and became a flow, a living force connecting past, present, and future. As my journey progressed, I realized that ancient principles only remain effective when accompanied by constant adaptation. The world changes, circumstances evolve, and what worked for ancient empires needed to be interpreted in light of the present. I learned that the true secret to prosperity lies not simply in following rigid formulas, but in understanding patterns and adapting them to the current context, keeping the essence intact. Ancient wisdom is, above all, flexible. It molds without losing its strength, allowing those who master it to remain ahead of the times. This adaptation requires humility and openness to learning. The more I studied, the more I realized that every mistake, every setback, held valuable information. Ancients transformed difficulties into lessons and adjusted their strategies silently, almost invisibly. I began to apply the same approach. Every failure became a learning map, every obstacle an opportunity to refine skills and strengthen long-term vision. I discovered that knowledge multiplies when learned mindfully and applied with intention. At the same time, I realized that adaptation and continuous learning are deeply connected to perception and strategic action. The more attentive I became to environmental cues, the faster I could identify when it was necessary to adjust a decision or anticipate changes. This ability to react with precision, without losing control or discipline, became one of the most powerful differentiators cultivated by the ancients. It was the ability to surf the waves of time without drowning in uncertainty, always maintaining the right rhythm. Another crucial point is that adaptation isn't just about survival, it's about expansion. The ancients didn't just preserve their wealth, they expanded it, organically multiplying resources, influence, and knowledge. I began to realize that by integrating continuous learning and flexibility into my actions, I could generate multiplier effects that went far beyond the immediate result. Every smart decision, every strategic adjustment, every applied insight reverberated, creating unexpected opportunities and strengthening the invisible foundation of prosperity. And it was in this process that wealth ceased to be merely a tangible goal. It became a dynamic flow, shaped by perception, action, energy, patience, alliances, long-term vision, resilience, selective knowledge, discernment, and now, continuous adaptation. Each principle reinforced the other, forming a coherent, living, and resilient system capable of maintaining itself and growing even in the face of the most abrupt changes. The sense of connection with ancient wisdom grew ever stronger, as if recovering something that had been lost to time but still held the power to transform not only lives, but destinies. Having reached this point in my journey, I realized that all the elements I'd learned, perception, strategic action, personal energy, patience, alliances, long-term vision, resilience, selective knowledge, discernment, and continuous adaptation don't work in isolation. They form an interdependent system, a kind of invisible map that guides every step of those who desire lasting prosperity. Each principle amplifies the other, creating a multiplier effect that reveals itself in results that are both tangible and invisible. The more I integrated these teachings into my life, the more I began to perceive patterns of success, predictable obstacles, and hidden opportunities that most people would never notice. One of the most impressive aspects is how wealth, when approached this way, becomes a reflection of one's own personal evolution. The more refined one's perception becomes, the more precise one's decisions become. The more consistent one's discipline and aligned energy, the stronger one's ability to withstand crises and adversity. Every relationship cultivated, every strategic action, every adjustment made based on continuous learning converges to create not only material prosperity, but clarity of purpose, influence, and legacy. It's as if the ancients had discovered a silent formula, invisible to the eye, yet powerful enough to shape entire destinies. Another key point that emerged is the importance of looking at the bigger picture. Wealth isn't just about money, property, or status. It's about the balance between resources, knowledge, actions, and impact. As I began integrating all the principles into a cohesive vision, I realized that every choice, even seemingly small ones, carried the potential to multiply. A well-applied insight could generate unexpected opportunities, a well-cultivated connection could open doors that seemed closed, and each thoughtful decision aligned with the long-term vision transformed challenges into levers for growth. And finally, I understood that true prosperity is not a fixed state, but a continuous flow. It is the daily practice of consciously applying ancient principles, always adjusting, learning, and expanding. The more I connected to this flow, the more I felt I was not only recovering lost knowledge, but participating in something greater, a tradition of wisdom and abundance that spans centuries and civilizations. This understanding brought not only practical results, but a profound sense of belonging and purpose, as if each step were in harmony with something much greater than myself. By bringing all these elements together, I realized that the lost secrets of wealth are not an inaccessible mystery. They exist, have been applied for generations, and can be recovered by those who have the courage to seek, study, apply, and persevere. And it is precisely this synthesis of principles that forms the basis of any true transformation, capable of generating not only wealth, but also impact, legacy, and freedom. Throughout this journey, it became clear that the lost secrets of wealth aren't just about money or possessions. They're about perception, strategic action, personal energy, patience, alliances, long-term vision, resilience, selective knowledge, discernment, and continuous adaptation, all interconnected, forming an invisible but incredibly powerful system. Applying these principles is no easy task. It requires dedication, courage, and discipline. But those who commit to living by this ancient wisdom discover something that goes far beyond material prosperity. They discover freedom, clarity, and the ability to transform not only their lives, but also the world around them. What the ancients taught, hidden beneath symbols, rituals, and almost secret practices, is still applicable today. What seemed lost to time can be recovered, interpreted, and molded to generate concrete results. Every conscious step, every decision aligned with a long-term vision, and every purposeful action creates invisible multiplier effects that strengthen the foundation of prosperity and expand the reach of our impact. It's an invitation to look beyond the obvious, question modern wisdom, and rediscover the power of principles that have spanned centuries. Now is your moment. The opportunity to transform your relationship with wealth, apply these teachings, and create a solid path for the future is before you. It's not just about learning, but about taking action. Each principle I've revealed here must be lived, practiced, and integrated into your daily life. Start small, but start now. Observe, plan, adjust, persist. Over time, you'll realize that what seemed distant and unattainable becomes real and sustainable. And if you want to continue exploring these paths, deepen your knowledge, and discover more secrets of ancient wisdom applicable to modern life, don't miss the chance to follow our upcoming content. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and be part of this journey of discovery, growth, and transformation. Remember, true wealth is more than gold, it's awareness, strategy, purpose, and legacy. And now, the choice to start building yours is in your hands.